Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Root Cause Analysis and Systemic Corrective Action. My name is Shannon Craddock, and I'm the Programs and Accreditations Manager here at Perry Johnson Registrars, and I welcome you. Today's webinar has mass appeal, and I hope you will find it helpful. Regardless of the management system standard against which you're seeking certification, the content of today's webinar will be helpful to you. To ensure sound quality, all participants have been muted. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions, so please type any questions that you have into the question feature of GoToWebinar, and at the conclusion of the prepared portion of today's presentation, I'll answer as many of these as possible. A copy of the slides and a recording of today's presentation will be available for download at www.pjr.com within 24 to 48 hours of the conclusion of today's webinar. Also at www.pjr.com, you'll be able to find information on new, upcoming, and previously recorded webinars. So today we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about why this particular topic. We'll also talk about the audit finding and its constituent parts, actions taken to correct or corrections. We'll discuss a technique for root cause analysis called the why technique. And then we'll talk about corrective actions, which definitionally are actions taken to prevent recurrence of an issue, and preventive actions, actions taken to prevent occurrence of an issue, as well as sound verification activities. So why are we doing this? Well, quite simply, we want to see your organization improve. I'm a believer that there is a strong correlation between third-party audit performance and an organization's quality record with its customers. And the purpose of a management systems audit isn't to convince the auditor to write as few nonconformities as possible. It's for the organization to accept these nonconformities as opportunities to improve and take systemic corrective action for each and every nonconformity that's found. And when this is done, we'll start to see the stronger correlation between an organization's third-party audit performance and their quality record with their customers. So audit findings should contain three distinct parts: the statement of nonconformity, objective evidence to support that statement, and a clear citation of the requirement that's not being met. If you're presented with an audit finding that does not contain these three parts, first of all, they should not be written by PJR auditors and should not be accepted by you, our valued clients. You should reject these audit findings at the closing meeting that are not written this way. You are empowered. Opportunities for improvement, although written rarely by PJR auditors because of the risk of consulting, should exist only as statements or recommendations. As they're not nonconformities, there would be no citation of a requirement not being fulfilled. Otherwise, we would have a nonconforming situation. So let's start by looking at the statement of nonconformity, which is the first piece of a well-written NCR. Often the nonconformity that's written is not the problem, but a symptom of the problem. So the problem needs to be expressed as an issue with the system. There's that very important word, system. If it's expressed in terms of a single person or a one-time occurrence or incident, it's not at the system level, it's at the symptom stage. And unfortunately, I see not only internal auditors make this mistake, but third-party auditors as well. So it's very important to get to the true problem. The systemic issue or the problem-solving efforts will not be effective. Fixing symptoms will not stop them from recurring. So suppose that you aren't feeling well. You've got a sore throat, you're running a fever, you're plagued with aches and pains. You can take some Tylenol or aspirin to alleviate your symptoms, and it will likely bring down your fever, and it may help with the sore throat pain and the body aches. But unless you understand what the true systemic issue, and let's say it's a strep throat infection, all the Tylenol in the world is not going to stop that strep throat infection. Also important to note that a well-written nonconformity should stand the test of time. The organization should be able to pull up nonconformities written years ago and understand exactly what the systemic issue was. So let's demonstrate this point of confusing the statement of nonconformity with symptoms of the problem by looking at a couple of examples. First, there was no training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954, indicating competence to run that job. This is a symptom, not the true systemic issue. Again, we're confusing objective evidence with the statement of nonconformity. We're expressing this as in terms of an issue with a particular person, that first shift operator. We're confusing the symptoms with the true systemic issue. A better way to write this: the system, there's that very important word, the system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. What is the symptom or the evidence allowing us to make this statement at the system level? There was no training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954, indicating competence to run that job. And then a clear citation of the ISO 9001 requirement not being met. In this case, it's 7.2D of ISO 9001 2015. And note, we're taking this out as far as possible. We're not just simply putting 7.2 or section 7. So a better way to write this, the system, there's that important word. We want to focus on the systemic issue or breakdown. The system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. Again, we're focusing on the systemic issue and not on a symptom of the problem or a particular incident or person. Another example of a poorly written nonconformity. Quality auditor in the blue cell was using an uncontrolled form to record the results of first piece inspection. Again, a symptom, not the true systemic issue, confusing objective evidence or symptoms with a statement of nonconformity. A better way to write this, the document control system is not completely effective. Whenever you can put the word system into your statement of nonconformity, that'll help guide you in making sure that your statement of nonconformity is written at that right level, that higher level, focusing problem solving on the systemic issue. So always strive to do that. The objective evidence is that the quality auditor in the blue cell was using an uncontrolled form to record the results of first piece inspection. And then a clear citation of the requirement not being met, 7531A, again, carrying that out as far as possible. The document control system is not completely effective, focusing on the systemic issue and not on a specific incident or person. So in closing, when you review a statement of nonconformity written by your PJR auditor, a customer doing a customer audit, or a member of your internal audit team, you want to ask yourself, have we distinguished between the symptoms of the problem and the true systemic issue? Does that final statement of nonconformity focus on a system issue? And are there clear data, objective evidence, and a very clear citation of the requirement not being met to assist in understanding? PJR has an internal document, that's our Advisory 3, requiring all auditors to document any non-fulfillment of a requirement as such. It is a problem when our auditors say, well, I'm not going to write this up, but you just go ahead and fix it. It's inexcusable in my mind. No benefit for you, and it contributes to the diminishment of the integrity of accredited management system certification. All you're going to do is fix the symptoms of the problem, that discrete incident the auditor saw, the unlabeled bin, the uncontrolled form, the uncalibrated gauge, and not on the system causing those escapes. So it's our expectation that any nonconformity written by a PGR auditor needs to contain those three parts, and that statement of findings should be written at the system level. So now let's talk about actions taken to correct. These are called corrections or containment actions, and they're actions taken with respect to the symptom or incident. They're incident-specific actions. So in the case of that analogy that I shared earlier, taking Tylenol or aspirin to alleviate your symptoms, bring down your fever, help with the body aches and the sore throat pain, those are incident-specific actions. Taking the Tylenol is a correction. And these are very important actions and need to be taken immediately to stop the symptoms from occurring or getting worse. Now, actions taken to correct typically take one of two forms. The first is what I just discussed. We calibrated the gauge, or we controlled the form. The second is adding a layer of inspection to catch any further occurrence of the issue. But remember, inspection adds cost to a system, not value. And we're going to see that once a corrective action, which is different than a correction, is implemented, these costly added layers of inspection that you've added, they should be able to be removed from the system. Oftentimes you'll hear organizations say, our customers put us on third-party containment, or we are doing 100% inspection to certify the product going out our door. You can't sustain that forever, especially if you expect to stay in business and make money. Once you've figured out what the root cause of the problem is and implement a corrective action to address that root cause, you should be able to remove that layer of inspection. So your containment actions or corrections should be very specific. So in the case of our first example, the training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954 was updated to reflect his competency to run the job unsupervised. You've addressed the issue. Or all copies of the uncontrolled form the quality auditor in the blue cell was using were destroyed. It's important to note, and this is an often forgotten step as it relates to correction, they also need to include an extent analysis. So let's talk about what an extent analysis is. So in an extent analysis, your auditor will have cited an instance, maybe two, that he or she has found, but how many more are there? Essentially, you need to figure out the depth and breadth of the problem. So if an auditor is auditing your calibration process or a manufacturing process that addresses the requirements of calibration, and they discover 2 gauges out of 200 that are not in a state of calibration, the expectation is that your organization looks at the other 198 gauges to see what state of calibration they are in. Okay, moving on to root cause analysis. Many CARs restate the incident for the root cause analysis, and this is not acceptable. 2 examples. Our organization failed to update the training matrix for the operator running job 9954. Yes, they did. Your organization did fail to update that matrix. We already told you that in the objective evidence we cited in our finding. You're not telling us why. Similarly, a root cause analysis of the quality auditor in the blue cell didn't use the correct form to record the results of first article inspection. Right on. Again, we already told you that. in the objective evidence and the nonconformity that we wrote. Why were they using the incorrect form? Some CARs also give containment actions for the root cause, and this is also not acceptable. So as I sit reviewing corrective actions, I'll see something listed as the correction, but also listed as the corrective action, and that's not appropriate. So if you're doing something as you're listening to me right now, checking your Instagram page or your email, stop. This is the single most important slide in the entire presentation. And I just saw the audience view go to 100%. A good root cause analysis answers the following question. What in the system failed such that the problem occurred? And I'm going to say that again, it's so important. What in the system? There's that word again, system. What in the system failed such that the problem occurred? Again, we need to be focusing on the system and not the incident or symptom of the problem. Our correction should have already taken care of those discrete escapes. We're now focusing on the system that allowed the escapes to occur in the first place. It's important to note that some problems may have multiple root causes or several possible root causes. And if the true root cause cannot be discovered, you'll need to take corrective action for all. If the root cause has been found, the problem can be turned on and off, just like a light switch. If the problem cannot be turned on and off at will, then the root cause has probably not been found. I previously worked in the automotive industry, and I worked for a plastic molder, and we had a dual cavity tool that made left-hand and right-hand parts. And we were in some serious trouble with one of our automotive customers because left-hand parts were getting packed in right-hand boxes and vice versa. We were on third-party containment, in fact. So we convened a problem-solving team, and one of the operators said, hey, if the configuration of this manufacturing cell weren't so narrow, perhaps we could arrange the pack-out boxes in a more logical configuration. So the narrow cell configuration, as it currently existed, forced the left-hand pack-out box to be directly in front of the right-hand pack-out box. So when the auditor grabbed the two parts that were dropped by the dual cavity tool, he or she would have to remember that the box directly in front of them was for left-hand parts, and the box directly in front of that was for right-hand parts. And this was sometimes forgotten. We couldn't, due to the narrow configuration of the cell, spread out the boxes so that one was at the left-hand side of the operator's body and the other was at the right-hand side of the operator's body. So we spent tens of thousands of dollars moving 3 presses, the press in question and the 2 on either side, to widen that manufacturing cell and allow for a more logical pack-out configuration. Therefore, when the auditor grabbed the parts that were dropped by the robot onto the conveyor, they could turn to the left and pack the left-hand part in the left-hand box and turn to the right and pack the right-hand part in the right-hand box. But guess what? We were still finding instances, or our customer was still finding instances of mixed parts. So we had not turned the problem off like a light switch. It was still turned on. Therefore, we had not found the true root cause. More on this later. There are many different techniques for root cause analysis. Is not the fishbone diagram, Ishikawa, the 5 why, or what I'd like to call the why technique, because sometimes you can get there in fewer whys, and sometimes it can take 6, 7, 8 whys. So let's look at those 2 examples we've been following throughout today's seminar. The system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective, supported by the evidence. No training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954 indicating competence to run that job. Okay, why no training matrix? So you begin by asking why questions over and over. So why was there no training matrix for the first shift operator? Well, the first shift supervisor failed to update the training matrix as required by the first of the month. Why did the first shift supervisor fail to do the updating? Well, before the end of the previous month, the HR manager would email the training matrix template to all the department supervisors, but this didn't happen this particular month. Why? Why didn't it happen? The HR manager left the company before the end of the month, and her replacement didn't email the template to all the supervisors. Well, why didn't the replacement do that? Well, the procedure for training didn't include a requirement to prompt the new HR manager to email the template to all supervisors. So in this case, we feel we've gotten to the true root cause of the problem in 4 whys. And this is somewhat of a gray area. How do you know you've asked why enough? And I always laugh and say, you know, if you've got young children and they say, why mom, why can't I do it? And when you get to the point, when you say, because I'm the mom or I'm the dad and I said so, you can probably reason you've gone far enough. But in all seriousness, the great thing to do is make sure that you have a multidisciplinary team so that you've got a lot of people saying, yes, we've gone far enough, as opposed to one person sitting alone working on these saying, yeah, I think we've gone far enough. Again, a lot of people in the room working on these will help. Okay, second example. The document control system is not effective. Supported by the evidence, the auditor in the blue cell was using an uncontrolled form. Well, why were they using an uncontrolled form? Well, controlled hard copies of the form had all been used up in the blue cell, so the quality auditor resorted to an uncontrolled form. Well, why did they resort to use of an uncontrolled form? The auditor in the blue cell was not aware that when no hard copies of a particular form were available, that the latest version of all forms could be accessed through the company's database. Well, why didn't they know this? The blue cell quality auditor wasn't given a username and password to access the database. They didn't even know that they could do so. Why? The HR didn't have a policy to ensure all new hires are granted a system username and password. Again, have we gone far enough? Do you feel you're at the point because you're the mom and you said so? Or better yet, are there enough people involved in your problem-solving process that you all concur that you've gone far enough, as opposed to a single person doing the problem-solving themselves? We will not accept the following for root cause analysis. We still see these a lot. Oversight. We see oversight all the time. Never, ever is it an acceptable root cause. We misunderstood the requirement. Actually, I've got a little bit of tolerance for this if it's the first audit, but not if it's surveillance audit 37. On the first audit, you may have completely misinterpreted the intent of a requirement. Now you understand it as a result of the auditor's guidance or line of questioning. The only acceptable corrective action then is gaining understanding or training in that requirement. Also unacceptable, I forgot, another ISO 9001 blunder. Our consultant messed up. Remember, consultants aren't responsible for your system, you are, or human error, also not acceptable. Systems allow people to make errors. You've got to fix the system. So now we've spoken about correction and root cause. Let's talk about corrective action. Corrective actions, unlike corrections, should address the root cause. Therefore, they should address that very important question: what in the system failed such that the problem occurred? Have we turned the problem off like a light switch? Common problem is that organizations give containment actions or corrections instead of corrective actions. Not acceptable. Corrective actions should not only address the system, but they should be irreversible and involve the change in the system. Training or retraining by itself is generally not a system change. Incident-specific actions or corrections are not irreversible. So if your corrective action is only going to say training, we're going to second guess that. Training is not a change in the system, and chances are you've already done training. Keep in mind, if you're in the automotive industry, corrective actions should prompt changes to your design or process FEMA, control plan, and may require a new PPAP. There should be at least one corrective action for each root cause that's identified, and subsequent data should show that the problem has 100% disappeared. So I shared an example from my work in the automotive industry where we spent tens of thousands of dollars moving manufacturing presses to create what we considered a more logical configuration of pack-out boxes. But alas, we were still mixing parts. Left-hand parts were showing up in right-hand boxes and vice versa. We convened yet another problem-solving team, and over a series of meetings, a third shift material handler said, you know, what if it was impossible to pack a left-hand part in a right-hand box and a right-hand part in a left-hand box? And there you have it. We worked with packaging engineers in our facility to reconfigure the pack-out boxes, and it was impossible to shove a left-hand box into the corrugated lining now of the pack-out box. And we could clearly demonstrate months down the road that the problem had 100% disappeared. Therefore, we knew we had the true root cause, a poor configuration of the corrugated within the pack-out boxes. So let's look at corrective actions for the two nonconformities that we've been following. First, the system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. Our corrective action is section 4.6 of the procedure for training. It was updated to include a requirement for the HR manager to email the matrix to all supervisors for updating before the end of each month. The HR manager was trained and she added an automatic reminder to Outlook to perform the task. Here you see training, but there's also a permanent system change. We revised a procedure, so it's not just training itself. Does this corrective action, updating the procedure, doing some training, adding the Outlook reminder, address the root cause? Let's go back and check. Procedure for training didn't include a requirement. Well, now it does. Our corrective action addresses our root cause. Second example, document control is not completely effective. Our corrective action. The new hire work instruction revised to include a requirement to grant new hires a username and password for the database. HR personnel trained on the change. Again, there is a training component, but there's also a permanent system change. We've changed our work instruction. Does this corrective action address the root cause? HR didn't have a policy to ensure all new hires are granted a system username and password. It sure does. Important to note that when training is part of the corrective action response, your response should contain the technique that will be used to verify the effectiveness of the training. Are you going to administer a test? Are you going to do follow-up at specified intervals later on? This is important to ensure that the training is effective. Chances are you trained at the very beginning, and if the problem presented itself, that training was not effective. How are you going to ensure that the same mistake doesn't happen again? All right, now let's talk about preventive actions. Preventive actions are different than corrective actions, as they answer one of two questions. What other systems might exist that have the same root cause present? Or what could I have had in place that would have prevented this from happening? Many corrective action responses put corrective actions for preventive actions. But remember that preventive actions address the future, not the past. What could still happen? Hasn't happened yet. We're trying to prevent it from happening, not what did happen. Preventive actions are intended to address the system, not the incident, and they involve changing systems to prevent problems. Keep in mind that preventive actions should not only be identified because of nonconformities. So what other systems might exist that have similar issues? A good approach to a robust management system is using preventive action as a proactive process with inputs from multiple sources. Near miss reports, 5S programs, lean initiatives, employee suggestions, etc. In other words, no nonconformity should never mean no preventive actions. Okay, let's talk about verification activities, which is a critical and often not performed step in the problem-solving process. And I see a lot of CAR forms that don't have places for verification at the appropriate location. So in a sound verification exercise, you need to be looking at the following. Have those containment actions, corrections been taken? Have you eliminated the symptoms of the problem? Have you taken your Tylenol? Have you calibrated the gauge and then done the extent analysis to see how many other gauges are in a state of suspect or non-conforming calibration status? Have you done a proper root cause analysis and can demonstrate you've turned the problem off like a light switch? Have you implemented irreversible systemic corrective actions that address the root cause? And if you've taken any containment or corrections that are of the added layer of inspection type, these should be able to be removed. And preventive actions have been considered if appropriate. When you do your verification, understand that corrective actions are reversible. When you change a system, it means you're changing how work is performed, and change is difficult. People and systems tend to return to where they feel comfortable. So continue to verify actions even after you get positive results on the first verification. Sometimes it's great, and I always recommend keeping things open for at least 18 months on your log for tracking purposes. And I'd like to acknowledge the IAOB for some of today's slide content. And that concludes the prepared portion of today's presentation. I'll now open the floor up to any questions that you may have. Keep in mind that to ensure sound quality, we've muted all participants. So please type any questions you have into the question feature, and I'll answer as many of these as possible. Eric is asking, can the word system be the same as process and or procedure? I would agree that the word system and process tend to be similar, not necessarily procedure, Eric, because there can be processes that aren't necessarily documented in a procedure. David's asking, how do you address when the system is an employee failed to follow an existing procedure in the system? Again, you know, you're always going to have instances where people aren't following a process or procedure. You need to figure out why they aren't following it. And if it's something other than the person just intentionally not following the procedure, you may want to look at how that procedure is written or how they were trained or how the effectiveness of the training was verified. It's the system that's allowing that person to make a mistake, unless they're intentionally making a mistake, David. Copies of the slides will be available for download, Stefano, at www.pgr.com within 24 to 48 hours. We don't email copies of the slides. Grace is asking, similar to the question that I just answered, how do you document a human error where the individual has personal problems which cause the error, or medical or mental distress? I probably would first ask if somebody's under mental distress, why they're involved in your production process. But you may want to look at error proofing as a way to eliminate that so that it's impossible for them to make mistakes where costs allow. April's asking, for our corrective action log, can we add a row that shows the corrective actions are only open for continued verification? I think that's a great idea, April. In fact, I would suggest adding multiple columns that show the dates at which you verified the corrective actions for ongoing effectiveness. So perhaps multiple columns. Brundaban is asking, is the root cause verified by the auditors? Our auditors will look at your correction, your extent analysis, how in-depth the root cause is, does the corrective action address the root cause, and is the problem turned off like a light switch? And we'll be able to assess if the problem has been turned off by looking at your verification activities. So we look at everything. What is the best way to address a failed corrective action? Well, you will know that the corrective action has failed when you are doing your verification and you see that the problem is not turned off like a light switch. So at that point in time, what I would do is exactly what I described, Parvinder, in my example about mixing left-hand parts and right-hand parts in the pack-out box. Convene another problem-solving team and do another why analysis, or go further in your existing why analysis. Again, copies of the presentation will be available for download. Sharad is asking, can a refresher quiz retraining to employees count as corrective action or preventive action? Well, it likely wouldn't count as a preventive action, but as part of a corrective action, if you did retraining and then administer a quiz to verify effectiveness of the training, that could count toward corrective action. Kevin's asking if I can please expand on training and retraining do not provide a change in the system. What is the interaction between a system change and training? Well, the reason I make a statement that training in and of itself is generally not the best corrective action is that chances are you trained in the beginning when you launched the activity. How is retraining going to be any different this time around? We see training thrown out as a corrective action all the time. So if you change the way you do training and offer a quiz to verify effectiveness, perhaps make the training interactive, that could help. But typically what we like to see, and this isn't in all cases, what we like to see is a permanent system change in a procedure, change in the way things are done, introduction of error-proofing methodology, something along those lines that change the way the work is performed. Now that's sometimes cost prohibitive, so you may want to try a new method of training with an evaluation of effectiveness first. Just be able to justify why you did that. Rob makes a statement. A good point about writing the CAR response is that the correction should address the identified nonconformity and the preventive action should address the root cause. Just want to correct that. The corrections should address the symptoms of the problem, and the corrective action, not the preventive action, Rob, should address the root cause. Someone's asking if an internal auditor should classify findings as minor or major, or should somebody else in the organization do that? There's no requirement to classify findings as minor or major. If that is a step in your internal audit process, to me, it makes the most sense for the internal auditor themselves to do it. But again, it's not a requirement. Michael is asking, some simple nonconformities are hard to determine a root cause, i.e., regulatory compliance was not included in your procedure. To me, that seems fairly straightforward to root cause, Michael. Why wasn't regulatory compliance included in your procedure? Who wrote your procedure? Was it only one person? Was that person aware of all applicable statutory and regulatory requirements? Should a team of people been writing the procedure? Who reviewed and approved the procedure before it got published and failed to catch that it didn't include regulatory compliance? Those are all the why questions you should be asking. Corey is asking, I think, a good question. Can an audit finding be found on a client's procedure without any objective evidence there was a nonconformance? So I think what you're describing here, Corey, is the auditor sees a procedure that was written, and the way the procedure is written, it will most certainly at some point in time lead to a non-conforming situation. But the auditor didn't actually see a symptom of that non-conforming situation. There was no escape. It could be luck. It could be the amount of time that procedure's been in use, but absolutely an auditor could write a finding. With root cause, Jordan, it's the auditor that's responsible for rejecting the root cause if it's found to be insufficient, which is why you may get root cause statements kicked back by your auditor. Sometimes after kicking back those nonconformities and the associated root causes multiple times, auditors will pass it through to the certification body's technical review process, and the technical review process will kick them back. But it can be rejected by the certification body at any level. It should be at the auditor level. Mitch is asking me to clarify what he views as a discrepancy. Corrective action should be irreversible, and that's what you should implement. But then you also said corrective action is reversible. What I said is that people and systems tend to return to where they feel comfortable. So you implement a system change. You want that system change to be irreversible. You've made a permanent change to a document or a procedure or a way that work is done, but people tend to fall back on bad habits. So you want to continue verifying the effectiveness of that corrective action. And that may take several verification attempts to make sure that it is in fact irreversible. I hope that addresses your question, Mitch. Great comment from Christopher, we are lean on work instructions, so it is sometimes difficult to present evidence of effectiveness of a corrective action other than lack of recurrence. Is that acceptable? It's absolutely acceptable, Christopher. I would expect maybe a statement of, we went out and polled, we looked at 5 auditors to make sure their training matrix was updated. There were no lapses. Or we went out to make sure that 5 gauges were calibrated. All were calibrated. No recurrence of the issue. Perfect. Downloading the presentation again, getting a lot of questions about that, www.pjr.com. Getting a question from Pete on, can you elaborate on extended analysis? Is this documented in the corrective action or does it need to be separate? Remember, the extent analysis should be part of your correction or containment. And let's get back to there in the presentation. So an action taken to correct addresses the symptom. So controlling the form or updating the training matrix. But then you want to do an extent analysis to see, okay, how many other forms are not in a state of control, or how many other training matrices aren't updated. That's your extent analysis. It's part of the correction. Amos has a question. Is there a difference between doing root cause analysis on systems that have IT errors as compared to human performance errors? I would think so, Amos. Likely you're going to see that the root cause of a software malfunction is perhaps the way the software was validated, but your line of questioning and the root cause would very likely be different. Getting questions about human error. I see one from Kathy. I see one from Kevin. Sheila and Sue Fran. Problems are repetitive and due to human errors. What must the system change be to ensure the elimination of these errors permanently? Well, if you're seeing a lot of human errors and you're always coming up with that as your root cause, you need to be asking yourself, what is it in the way our system is set up that allows humans to make these errors? That is allowing a human, for example, to pack a part that doesn't have a piece of foam or added clip. You likely are at the point in your system where you need to invest in error proofing for that particular process. And I think you'll see that the investment in the error proofing will eventually outweigh the cost of your repeated problem solving and containment. But you're getting at the point where you see repeated human errors in a process where error proofing is needed. Lots of questions left. Let me try to get through as many of these as possible. We've got about 11 minutes remaining. Tim's asking me a great question that really ties into 9001 2015 base standards, concept of risk analysis and how it relates to corrective actions. Tim, risk analysis is a great, demonstrates a great application of preventive actions. So if you're looking at risk, in many cases you quantify risk. One way of doing this is looking at the severity of a risk, the likelihood of occurrence, and your ability to detect it. And where that is there's a high likelihood of that, you want to implement some type of preventive action to mitigate that risk. So I think there's a really direct correlation between risk and preventive action. JC is asking a question. If I'm conducting a supplier audit, so you're auditing one of your suppliers, how do I handle a situation or finding in the supplier system that may be in conflict with the supplier certification by the auditor? Not really sure what you mean by this, JC, but if two people are trained to the same management system standard, they should be looking at the same situation and drawing the same conclusion. John's asking, what's the most effective tool for root cause analysis? Is this not Fishbone or 5 Whys? John, I like the why analysis. I think it's the easiest and most straightforward. But the answer to the question is whatever you will use consistently in your organization. Mark's asking, in your first corrective action of your problem with the boxes, I missed why that didn't work. What we did, Mark, is we moved the manufacturing presses so that there was a more logical configuration of the packaging boxes on the floor layout. But we were still mixing left-hand parts and right-hand boxes and vice versa. We didn't turn the problem off like a light switch, so we knew that wasn't the root cause. Chris, great point here. It can be hard to convince a client they need to take a team approach to reduce the incidence of errors. Can you recommend how an auditor can most effectively make this recommendation? Perhaps a great thing to do, Chris, is on your problem-solving form, include a blank or a spot on the form where members or the names of people on the problem-solving team are recorded. And this can be a reminder or trigger that more than one person should be doing this. So, and maybe put, participant 1, participant 2, participant 3, etc. So it's not just one person. Error-proof your form. Kimberly's asking, when responding to nonconformities, is it adequate to provide statements of root cause, correction, and prevention? We don't necessarily need PARs, Kimberly, or is evidence required, i.e. the rewritten procedure? We're going to need to see those permanent system changes. We need to see, for example, rewritten procedures. Kevin is making the statement, small companies often do not have the resources to assign a committee to work on the root cause. How can the person assigned to the task be most effective in finding the root cause? We'll assign at least one other person, Kevin. There's no reason, unless it's only a single person company, that only one person should be doing the root cause analysis. Question from Miguel. Hello, Miguel. May not be 5 whys. Sometimes 2, 3, or 4 whys is acceptable. Sometimes it may take more than 5 whys. Tim's asking, if you add an extra check due to an existing check that is not being done by an operator, how long do you continue the second check? That second check is an added costly layer of inspection, Tim, and you should only keep it as long as you take to figure out the root cause of the issue and implement a corrective action to address that root cause. Getting some comments about the sound quality. I apologize for that. Hopefully it's coming in clearer now. Dina is asking, a person incorrectly believed that flow down of requirements was covered. Would this be human error? I think it's one of the first whys in your why analysis. So the finding is likely the evidence of the finding states that some requirements were not flowed down to suppliers. Well, why weren't they flowed down? Your first why is probably, well, the person responsible for this activity thought they had flowed them down. Okay, well, why wasn't this caught? Did anyone review what was flowed down to the supplier? Yes, no. If so, who reviewed it? One person, a team of people? What was that person or team's competence? Are they aware of all the flow down requirements and to whom each of the requirements should be flowed down to? Definitely not an example of a human error. I think there's a process issue. What's a good best practice for length of time for a verification period for a corrective action? And the same question for the total CAR process from root cause to verification. Well, first, I'll make the statement that correction and containment should be implemented very quickly, likely in accordance with customer requirements, about 24 to 48 hours. The root cause analysis and corrective action may take longer, and your verification efforts really are based on what type of corrective action is in place. Sometimes it may be once a year that the situation presents itself, Stefano, so you may need to keep the car open longer. But again, don't feel the need to close the car after a first positive verification. People and systems tend to return to where they feel comfortable. Okay, folks, we're out of time. Again, want to remind you that a copy of today's webinar can be downloaded from www.pjr.com. You can also access copies of the slides from that same location. Just look for previously recorded and upcoming webinars. And I thank you for your time today. I hope you found this helpful. Based on the number of participants that we had, we will be repeating this curriculum in the near future. Thanks for your time.